نورة نورة
هلا
هنا.
نورة بتيجي بتطلع ايدها من الشاشة هيك بتمسكني من رقبتي.
تكون نامت.
خلص.
I don't care if we're recording. We're recording.
Yeah, we're recording. We're going to be recording in just a bit, but we're actually online right now. So
Okay.
yeah. So here we go. Sorry about that, Noura. All right, so assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. We are excited today, inshallah, to start our tafsir. So there are a number of different things that we talked about last time. Let's go back really quick, and we were talking about قُلْ لَا يَسْتَوِي الْخَبِيثُ وَالطَّيِّبُ, and we kind of compared a number of different things in relationship to this ayah. We talked about the variant tafsir in regards to what really is referred to, of course, by this word, al-khabith. Is it an inclusive word? Or is it an exclusive word to being exclusive to a particular evil thing, halal, haram, or is it a sin, or is it any evil thing, or what really is it referring to? And we went in details in that regards. And then we went into, I guess, from the point of defining what really is good and bad to going into the implication. And if we were talking about more complex situations, perhaps sale, transactions, marriage, etc., what would happen to those types of contracts? And then we went into the classification of what is a sahih contract, what is a fasid contract, what is a batil contract, or void and invalid, or at least a genuine or an authentic, or at least a complete and a complete contract, and what's an incomplete contract? Is there any way to fix some of those contracts, etc.? And we also went into the differences of opinions between the Hanbalis, the majority of the scholars, and also the Hanafis, and their differences of opinions in defining what is sahih and what is fasid and what is batil. So we went into that classification. Then, of course, since that was actually taking us into those classifications, this actually takes us to the other ayah. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تسألوا عن أشياء تبدى لكم تسؤكم وإن تسألوا عنها حين ينزل القرآن تبدى لكم عفى الله عنها والله غفور حليم. So first what I'm going to be translating the ayah in general, and then we're going to get into, I guess, some more scrutinized and intricate tafsir. Let's see. يا أيها الذين آمنوا. Of course, when we see أيها الذين آمنوا, يا أيها, that's basically munada right there. It's calling out and letting the believers, basically, that are intimidated and certainly want to be part of those that are part of the believers. The ayah says, well, here's what you need to do. لا تسألوا, do not ask about matters. And we're going to get into, well, what matters are we talking about? If it were to be revealed to you, it would harm you. And if you were to ask about it when the Quran is revealed and it became apparent to you, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, what happened previously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not hold you accountable for it. And for the Lord Almighty is Ghafurun Halim. He's all forgiving, and all forbearant. And قد سألها قوم من قبلكم, for other nations had asked about it before you, and then they had become denying, or at least, of course, not applying it, and they became kafirin. So what does that even mean? How do we understand all of this? ما جعل الله من بحيرة ولا سائبة ولا وصيلة ولا حام ولكن الذين كفروا يفترون على الله الكذب وأكثرهم لا يعقلون. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether what he had created in terms of camels, whether what people designated as somewhat of having some sanctity, whether it's an animal that they had considered that is not to be used, or whether that is to be treated in a certain way or designated for a certain type of a ritual. All of that is basically made up and a blasphemy created by those that were disbelievers and attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and most of them are not capable of comprehending and realizing that those paradigms and that area of what actually makes the truth and what makes a paradigm of justice. So a couple of things to say about this ayah. Let's just first ask the questions. So why was the ayah telling us not to ask questions? Or was it really telling us not to ask questions? لا تسألوا عن أشياء تبد لكم تسؤكم. Is it telling us that we're not supposed to be asking questions? Is there a reason for the revelation of this ayah that would probably give us a better clarification on what we're not supposed to be asking about? Well, does that mean we're not supposed to be asking for a fatwa on matters? Does that mean I would not be held accountable if I didn't know the answer, and therefore it would be best for me not to get the ilm, or else I'll be held accountable only if I had known something? Is that even true? Or how do I understand that I am seeing that this ayah is telling us, well, if something is revealed in the Quran, then I would be not held accountable, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically dismiss me from if I were to do something. Does that mean I won't be held accountable if I were to do something not knowing that it's haram? How do I understand that? And when it says سألها قوم من قبلكم ثم أصبحوا بها كافرين, does that mean that if a person commits a sin and they probably asked about a fatwa, but then later on they didn't apply the fatwa, does that mean that they had just gotten out of the fold of Islam and they had become a kafir? So if you were to say that the reason of revelation is a certain story, how do we understand the context of this ayah? And it was talking about the different types of animals and the way that they dealt with those types of animals. It regarded that there was a certain ritual, a certain practice, and that they were basically just passing on the legacy of their ancestors in relationship to their spirituality, to their commitment to their ancestors, to the gods, etc. So if there was nothing wrong necessarily within that practice, why can't we just keep the inspiration because it was inspiring people to get to God, to understand, I guess, how to be committed, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called it يَفْتَرُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ الْكَذِبِ, had considered it that it was a blasphemy created by these people and attributing it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that the majority did not really understand the paradigm, and therefore basically describing them as لا يعقلون, that they were acting in a way that is insane, or perhaps what does the word لا يعقلون really mean? So in order to answer a lot of these questions, it's not enough to just look at a surfaced interpretation. We really need to go back to the books of tafsir that derived a lot of these answers by looking at, one, of course, the hadith, two, the wordings and the context for these ayat, and number three, certainly what the Sahaba had explained and scholars had explained in regard to these ayat. Let's go back to Tafsir al-Qurtubi right there. So Tafsir al-Qurtubi said, well, there are 10 different matters to talk about in regards to this ayah. Number one, he said that al-Bukhari and Muslim, so whenever we would see that he had said al-Bukhari and Muslim had narrated this quote, and certainly when he says al-lafdhu lil-Bukhari, this basically in parentheses would tell us that Imam Muslim had a similar narration, but the exact wording for this quote goes back to al-Bukhari. But remember this, al-Qurtubi is Maliki madhab, and certainly Malikis prefer Imam Muslim's at least hadith book over al-Bukhari, but still, that doesn't mean that they would disregard al-Bukhari. So let's see. He said, عن أنس قال رجل يا نبي الله من أبي؟ قال أبوك فلان. قال ونزلت يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تسألوا عن أشياء تبد لكم تسؤكم. Anas, a Sahabi, who was at the time we're looking at, he was probably 12 years old, 13 years old at the time. Anas ibn Malik, he was basically the personal keeper. His mother, Haram, basically came to the Prophet ﷺ and offered that Anas ibn Malik would be the Prophet ﷺ's personal helper to basically maintain things, whether it's fetch something or whether it's cleaning something, just basically being this child to help the Prophet ﷺ as a personal assistant. So Anas ibn Malik, in fact, he had seen a lot of things within the home of the Prophet ﷺ because he did not yet reach the age of puberty. So he was capable of going into the Prophet ﷺ's home and witnessing a lot of things. And many times, same thing with Abdullah ibn Abbas. He would say, "Bittu 'inda khalati Maymuna." I slept over at my aunt's house, Maymuna, because Maymuna is bint al-Harith, which is the Prophet ﷺ's uncle. She's basically his cousin. Okay, so Abdullah ibn Abbas would say, I slept over my aunt's house, which is the Prophet ﷺ's house, and he was watching the Prophet ﷺ and what he was doing. So Anas ibn Malik was not necessarily related to the Prophet ﷺ because Anas ibn Malik was actually from Al-Ansar. He was originally from Medina. So he said, a man said, O Prophet of Allah, who's my father? So he said, your father is such and such. Then the ayah was revealed, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَسْأَلُوا عَنْ أَشْيَاءٍ تُبْدَ لَكُمْ تَسُؤْكُمْ. Don't ask about things. If you were to know the truth of it, it might harm you. But let's look at the story. Did the Prophet ﷺ actually say the real name, or was somebody exposed here? Why did this ayah get revealed? Let's see, there is another narration also upon Anas that the Prophet ﷺ, it's another narration, فوالله لا تسألوني عن شيء إلا أخبرتكم به ما دمت في مقامي هذا. That the Prophet ﷺ said, anything you would ask, as long as I'm standing here, I'm going to answer the question for you. A man comes up and basically says, أين مدخلي يا رسول الله? Where's my eventual stay, O Prophet of Allah? But the Prophet ﷺ had said, anything that you would ask me, I'm going to answer the question right now. That was that moment. This man basically said, well, what's going to be my eventual stay? Meaning on Judgment Day. The Prophet ﷺ told him that he was going to be in hellfire. We don't know the name of that person, and some scholars actually said the reason why his name was kept anonymous was to do satr and to hide it for him. Abdullah ibn Hudhafa, who was a Sahabi, he said, O Prophet of Allah, who's my father? And he said, Abuka Hudhafa. Your father is Hudhafa. So you could see this hadith is actually an authentic hadith, but there's really more to knowing about these hadith. First of all, Ibn Abdul Barr, who was Maliki, and of course, where was he from? Well, we're talking about Morocco here. And remember, now, when we're speaking about Moroccan, since we've got a Moroccan sister right there, we're speaking about most of the scholars were actually from Morocco. And yes, many were from Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco. So those were the areas where, of course, some of the most important scholars like Ibn Abdul Barr. He said Abdullah ibn Hudhafa had basically become Muslim a very long time, even before that. So he was an early Muslim. he migrated to the land of Abyssinia, which basically is Ethiopia, the second time, and even witnessed Badr. And he said that he was a person, fihi du'aba. Well, what does that even mean? Fihi du'aba means that he was a person that liked to joke around, that liked to entertain others. And these types of personalities, they're really interesting because they're definitely people that you would want to spend a lot of time with them. And he said, and he was the person that the Prophet ﷺ had sent to Kisra. Kisra was basically the king of Persia at the time, and he had basically sent with him a note to invite him to Islam. And then when the Prophet ﷺ had said, "Who's your father?" he said, "Your father is such," but you might actually think that, hey, like his mother would be so proud of that, but his mother got so angry, even though, let's see what happened. His mother got so angry and she said, "I had never seen a child that is far worse than you. You are basically committing uquq to your mother." She said, "How did you guarantee that your mother might not have committed in Jahiliyyah times what other women might have committed?" And then you ask this question, how did you guarantee that your mother might not have committed something like that? And perhaps right there in front of everyone, you might have exposed your mother right in front of everyone. Did she actually say that did the Prophet ﷺ say that his mother had committed zina? No, she didn't. And no, he didn't. And certainly the person that Abdullah ibn Hudhafa had known that was his father, the Prophet ﷺ confirmed that really was his father and that his mother did not cheat on his father. So everything was really still the same, but the mother, she got angry because she said, if that was not something that was true, in other words, I would have been exposed, and how did you guarantee that I was a woman of honesty, a woman of a good practice? You shouldn't be asking these kind of questions and perhaps expose your mother or expose anybody in front of everyone. And he said, by Allah, even if the Prophet ﷺ would have, if he would have said that I'm the son of another black man, I would have actually went after him, because he was basically saying, I would believe the Prophet ﷺ because I would know that he would not speak of his own self. Let's look at another story. Tirmidhi and Ad-Daraqutni, they basically said that another narration that Ali ibn Abi Talib said when this ayah was revealed, and of course, وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا. And that, of course, this ayah in Surah Al-Imran, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken upon people, in other words, obligated and made it as an obligation upon people to go for Hajj, whoever is capable of going to Hajj. So then they said, "O Prophet of Allah, is this something we're supposed to be doing every single year?" But the Prophet ﷺ stayed quiet. So they said, "Is it something obligatory upon us to do every single year?" So that's when he responded, and he said, "No." And if I would have said yes, then we would have been obligatory every single year, basically. So that's when the ayah was revealed, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَسْأَلُوا عَنْ أَشْيَاءَ إِن تُبْدَ لَكُمْ تَسُؤْكُمْ. You who believe, don't ask about matters if it were probably giving you more instructions, probably giving you more restrictions. It might make your life even more challenging and perhaps تسؤكم means it might actually put you in more restrictions and more harm. And certainly you could see that al-Bukhari, when asked about this hadith, he said that this hadith is hadithun hasan. What's the difference between a hadith hasan, hadith da'if, and a hadith that is sahih? So just to note that one, the hadith sahih, let's write that down and maybe we can clarify it. In اللغة العربية, we would basically say ما اتصل إسناده بنقل العدل and الضابط عن العدل الضابط or عن مثله, let's make it short, عن مثله إلى منتهاه من غير شذوذ ولا علة قادحة. Okay, can you explain this in English? Sure. So you got whatever has a complete chain of narration, and this chain of narration, this narrator is basically taking this information upon a person that is adl. Al-adl is basically a person that is pious, a person that lacks خوارم المروءة. خوارم what? Al-muru'ah. What does that mean? Does that mean a person that commits haram? No. It means a higher level, that a person is not only committed to the limit, which is halal haram, but this person is going farther and not practicing any form of what basically is considered a behavior that is not honorable. And al-dabat. Every single person that is within that chain of narration is basically capable of, one, memorizing the words of a hadith, a report, passing on this report, of course, in a way that does not contradict another scholar's or basically the report upon basically the report upon another scholar, and we're speaking about the whole chain of narration containing the same exact conditions, which is one, that every single person in the chain of narration is authentic, is competent to passing on the information, is basically pious in their religion, and certainly is not contradicting another scholar / narrator who's probably even more authentic than them. So you're looking at that. So with al-hadith al-hasan, it basically lacks one of the conditions, which is one of the chain of narrators or one of the narrators within this chain of narration is basically lacking the ability to be competent in their memory to say the exact wording of the hadith. But other than that, they're basically all in according to the different conditions of an authentic hadith. So that's basically what that means. And that's the piece of it that we would basically look into. So wait a minute, do we actually have two stories here? Now we actually right now might have three stories. Number one, this person basically asked, well, where's going to be my ending time? Is it going to be hellfire? Is it going to be Jannah? There's another basically story, well, your father is such and such, and he was right about it. And another story basically says that this man asked, well, are we supposed to be doing Hajj every single year? And which story is basically going to be the reason for the revelation of that story? Well, let's look into more. Are there even more stories? Let's see. Something similar to the story before. Let's go for another one. And al-Hasan al-Basri, basically said in regards to this ayah, سألوا النبي عن أمور الجاهلية التي عفى الله عنها ولا وجه للسؤال عما عفى الله عنه. لا وجه للسؤال ما عفى الله عنه. الحسن البصري, well, who's الحسن البصري? الحسن البصري was actually a tabi'i. What about him? So this tabi'i actually had something really interesting about him. He basically had a special kind of a nanny. A nanny? And why was she so special? This nanny was actually Salama. And who's that? That's the Prophet ﷺ's wife. So his mother was actually Salama's own slave. She would go work and leave Hassan basically with Salama to take care of him. Just imagine that. He was actually known to being a person of great zuhd, of great asceticism, of great contribution in ilm as well. And he said that what they had asked about were just different things that were common practices during the pre-prophetic era, during the time of Jahiliyyah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had just dismissed them. Now it's basically supposed to be a new era. Don't bring back, in other words, things that were practices during that time. Now you're practicing something new. Don't keep on asking about those things. Just move on. Now I want you to look at this quote right here, because this is really important in relationship with the other ayah, ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا كَافِرِينَ. Since we're coming across it, let's just look at it for a bit, because we're going to get back to it. This narration, it basically said Abu Huraira had narrated that the Prophet ﷺ said, Ya ayyuhan nas, kutiba alaykum al-hajj. O people, you are obligated to perform hajj. But then a man comes up, the same story, and he said, is it to be performed every single year? And the Prophet ﷺ just dismissed the question. In other words, just stayed silent about it, didn't even answer the question. And this is important to realize. When you ask someone a question and they heard your question, they didn't answer the question, don't ask the question again and again. It's one way of being polite that they don't want to answer your question. If you know very well that they heard your question, they didn't want to answer the question, just be polite and don't necessarily insist on asking questions. It's part of the adab. But then the man insisted to ask the same question. Are we supposed to do this every year? But that's when the Prophet ﷺ said, Man al-qa'il? Who's the person that's asking this question? And they said, that person is asking this question. That's when the Prophet ﷺ said, by the one who has my soul in his hand. If I would have said yes, then that would have meant that it would be wajibat, it would be obligatory, it would be mandatory every single year to go and perform Hajj, and you would not have been capable of performing it every single year. And if you would have said yes, and you did not apply it, then even if you had an excuse not to do it, that would lead you to kufr. That would lead you to disbelief. That's when this ayah was revealed. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَسْأَلُوا عَنْ أَشْيَاءٍ تُبْدَ لَكُمْ تَسُؤْكُمْ. So it's, a couple of things we take from this hadith is that the importance of looking at the wording. If something is showing an imperative verb, that would mean la wajibat. That would mean it's obligatory to do. And if we are not committed to that obligation, later on, remember the word that we had explained before. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let's go back to it. Where was that word that we did before in regard to the previous ayah? And here we go. أَمْ حَسِبَ الَّذِينَ اجْتَرَحُوا السَّيِّئَاتِ أَن نَجْعَلَهُم كَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. And we said the word اجْتَرَحُوا comes from the root جَرَحَ, which basically means to cause a wound, a cut, etc. So how is it that this is اجترحوا? How is it that this becomes some form of a wound? And we said, well, when we're speaking about any sin that is committed, it goes farther goes farther than the wood, it can actually cause an infection, it can harm you, etc. So when you're looking at جِتَرَحُ السَّيِّئَاتِ, the same thing right there when we're looking at the other ayah that we're working on, that it goes farther than just a sin that you might be committing, and it can actually lead to kufr without you realizing if you were to not put it into practice. So just keep that one in mind, because that's why this ayah is saying قَدْ سَأَلَهَا قَوْمٌ مِّن قَبْلِكُمْ ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا كَافِرِينَ. And then, of course, there are different nations. They would ask about different rulings. They would request certain, perhaps, miracles. They wanted to perhaps ask about other things, not for the sake of asking to learn, but for the sake of, one, it would be for the sake of just wasting time, for the sake of not wanting to inquire about something, but for the sake of stalking, for the sake of just somehow, of course, wanting to expose somebody, etc. So not every single question that you're being asked you necessarily want to answer right away. You have to ask yourself, is this person wanting to inquire? Do they have the right to inquire such a question? How do I answer the question? And that's why it's important to be slow sometimes in your speech and not necessarily be fast in your speech, because when you are faster, you are more likely to commit mistakes in answering those questions than being slow and taking the time to process, one, the question and what's the most appropriate way to answer, and give the answers that suit the necessary wordings, the necessary situation, the context to give the right answers. And this is important. And Ibn Abbas, he basically said, of course, نزلت في قوم سألوا رسول الله عن البحيرة والسائبة والوصيلة والحام. So what is that? They're basically this narration is basically coming to say, well, no, they actually asked about something else. What were they asking about? He said, well, they were asking about the animals that were, it was a certain common practice during the time of Jahiliyyah, certain animals, if it were that animal were to have a set number of female babies, they would basically consider it that it had produced enough, and therefore it would be left as basically considered a form of a sanctuary animal. They would put some signs that, no, you cannot slaughter this, you cannot ride on this, and that's basically ilham. You are not allowed to ride on it. It's designated for the gods. It was in a place of sanctity. And certainly, same thing, if they would do with not only camels, but sheep and certain other animals, they would show and indicate a certain sign that these animals were not to be used as other animals are used, because they are to be regarded as a place of sanctuary designated for the gods. So that's, of course, Ibn Abbas, that's his quote. And he said, well, don't you see what is coming after, what came after this ayah is basically right there, this ayah. He said, so what were they asking about? He said, well, you can look at the context, and the context would tell you that they were asking about the different religious practices that they used to do before they had become Muslim, and whether they should continue such a practice. So that's basically why this ayah was revealed in regards to, of course, what kind of questions were supposed to be asked and what was not supposed to be asked. So let's look at this one. And al-Qurtubi said, in response to all of those different narrations and what he thinks the preponderant opinion and the preponderant report for the reason of the revelation. He said, وَفِي الصَّحِيحِ وَالْمُسْنَدِ كِفَايَةٌ. He said, what you have narrated in basically Sahih al-Bukhari, right there, the narration that was mentioned, and even in al-Musnad, which basically is this one, and also Musnad Ahmad, basically that narration, said that that's basically enough for us to really know the reason for the revelation. And he said, and it is possible that this ayah was revealed to answer all the questions that were answered as asked before. So it is possible that, yes, there was a time when they asked about al-Bahira and these types of animals that they used to do as a ritual and what they were supposed to do with it. The ayah was revealed saying, لا تسألوا عن أشياء تبد لكم تسؤكم. Another time, perhaps a person asked, well, should we perform Hajj every single year? Then the ayah was revealed, لا تسألوا عن أشياء تبد لكم تسؤكم. Another time, someone asked, well, what's going to be my ending, basically fate? And he said, well, hellfire. Then the ayah was revealed, لا تسألوا عن أشياء تبد لكم تسؤكم. Don't ask questions. If you were to know the details of it, it would harm you. And that's also one thing I would say, especially perhaps for women. Many times I would say our interest, our excitement to know certain details can actually put us in a lot of distress. As women, especially perhaps in polygamous marriages, with our in-laws, asking our husbands or etc., certain questions about the past and etc. Don't ask these kind of questions, because if you were to know the answer, it's going to put you in a lot more distress. So keeping it private is probably going to be better for your mental health, better for your relationship, better for certainly your future. So لا تسألوا عن أشياء تبد لكم تسؤكم is not necessarily only in relationship to the Quran, but you also have to learn, of course, the adab of which questions to ask, when to ask, and learning how to limit the amount of speech, because the amount of speech can take you into perhaps engaging in, let's look at this one. Let's look into this one to answer engaging in what? Ibn Awn, he said, سألت نافعا. Who's Nafi'? Well, Nafi' was one of the direct students for Imam Malik. Nafi' was later going to be one of the main figures that spread al-madhab al-Maliki in Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria. When he was asked about لا تسألوا عن أشياء تبد لكم تسؤكم, he said, لم تزل المسائل منذ قد تكره. He said, well, from that time, we're speaking about a lot of the different questions that people might ask. That's when, well, basically it would be hated that people would just engage in different questions that is really not necessary. And let's see, he said Muslim, Sahih Muslim. So why did he say this one? Because Ibn Awn, and also, of course, this is now we're looking at a Maliki issue. They said, Rawa Muslim, and here's their evidence. Muslim had narrated عن المغيرة ibn Shu'bah. Oh, who's al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah? So al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah was actually a Sahabi. He was very distinct in many ways because al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah, he was also very polygamous, by the way. He had almost 18 wives. And some narrations said it was 9, but very polygamous. Just on a side, yesterday, my son, who's only 10 years old, I guess they were my kids, I don't know why, but they were having conversation over about polygamy. And it was, I'm just overhearing their conversation and what they're talking about. And my 10-year-old son, he said, it would be very confusing to have 4 wives. That's a lot of information to process. I found it very interesting how a 10-year-old would think that having 4 wives was too much information to process. I don't know why I'm saying this, but it's really interesting. Anyhow, so Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah, he said, well, in a narration upon the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ حَرَّمَ عَلَيْكُمْ عُقُوقَ الْأُمَّهَاتِ ووأد البنات ومنعا وهات وكره لكم 3 قيل وقال كثرة السؤال وإضاعة المال. This hadith, even if we were to spend the whole lecture today just talking about this hadith, would actually be enough. Well, let's look at this hadith. First of all, this hadith is authentic. It was narrated by Muslim, it was narrated by Musnad Ahmad, narrated by Al-Bukhari. So certainly there's nothing to question about the authenticity of this hadith. This hadith is key. What does it say? Let's do a surfaced interpretation first. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbid upon you the disrespect of your mothers, infanticide of young girls, and to prevent something, in other words, a continuation, consistency in preventing or giving. I'm going to go in details of what that means. And he hated 3 things for you. It was said, and asking too many questions and wandering money. Is that really what this is a very surfaced one. So now let's go in details. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid upon you disrespecting mothers. Why not disrespecting fathers? Disrespecting mothers because we are more likely to disrespect our mothers for a number of different things. Number 1, taking advantage of their compassion, taking advantage of their affection, taking advantage of their, of course, mothers are less in authority. A father usually takes a number of different things in consideration. So the child from early childhood learned how to watch their boundary with their fathers, but with their mothers, we basically are intimidated perhaps to transgress the limits with our mothers than with our fathers. So in order to be a person of principle / a person of piety, the Prophet ﷺ is telling you really want to watch your iman, you really want to test to see how far in committed to your iman you really are. Look at the way you treat your mother. That's the first thing. Look at the way you treat your mother. And certainly there are a number of different reasons to why we might transgress the limits with our mothers more. Number 1, certainly mothers, they get to do a lot of, let's say, giving commandments at home because of little different, probably little things at home. She's basically going to give you so many different instructions in so many different details, but fathers would usually have less contact with their children, and the less connection, of course, the more honorable this person becomes because you would fear the outcome. But of course, the mothers, because the closer the relationship with the mother, you tend to learn more about their attitudes. You might learn more about their psychology. The children would more test their mother's impulsive behavior, etc. You would know when to take your mother seriously, when not to take her impulsive reaction seriously, etc. And then it becomes a lot more intimidating to transgress the limits with the mothers by taking advantage of their emotions and taking advantage of their affection. And certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ, of course, you could see numerous ayat were emphasizing on mothers, and numerous ahadith like this one was emphasizing to make that commitment to respecting the mothers is basically one of the main key things to maintaining your iman. ووأد البنات. What is وأد البنات? وأد البنات is basically infanticide. Infanticide, of course, during the time, the pre-prophetic era, the reason why they used to do infanticide, because they considered that these girls might grow up to probably commit something haram one day, disgrace the family. So the best thing to do is to bury them alive. And in fact, the women would have, just imagine, and you're getting your baby, you're going through all the contractions, labor pain, etc. And then what happens? They used to basically dig a ditch right underneath the woman's buttocks, really. And if the baby is a female, right away the woman is basically having the baby. The baby is discovered to be a girl right away from the womb to basically the ditch right there, and just bury the baby right on the spot before it even moves, before it even gets to see anything. Right on the spot it would get buried. So this was a common practice, and it was seen as an honorable behavior because it was portrayed that this person is so committed to their honor that they're willing to kill their own baby girls alive. All right, so that was definitely forbidden by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of the injustice there it contains. No need to comment on that one. وَمَنْعًا وَهَاتٍ. What is al-man'? Al-man' is to forbid something, is to basically not give. So when we're speaking about man'an, you're basically being selfish. You're not giving what you're commanded to give, whether that's sharing, or whether that's sadaqah, or whether that's zakah, or whether that's giving people their rights. That's al-man'an. Il-hat is basically to request. Okay, so a person that they probably have enough money, but they're still requesting more. They're continuously asking for support, continuously asking for assistance, if it's available. There's a food shelf, even though you've got food, but there's a food shelf. I'm just going to go and just get some. But you know that you already have enough. Why are you here just stacking? And let's say maybe perhaps they're passing out toys. I'm going to go get some toys. I'm going to go get some clothes. There's available, or probably maybe begging for assistance, maybe getting some more. If it's available, you're just going to go get it. So that's basically ilhat. Islam is teaching us that whether we're speaking about finding things that are probably provided, not because it's available, it doesn't mean you go get it, but learn how to stay a person of independence. You put in the effort to bring your own items, to make your own items, to be an independent person and not depend on others to give you, or on others to basically have the upper hand. You be the person to basically provide, and not the person to ask for something. وَكَرِهَ لَكُمْ ثَلَاثًا. And he hated three things basically because of the impact that they would have on your iman. قِيلَ وَقَالَ. What is قِيلَ وَقَالَ? It was said, and such said. Because with such and such said, and he said, and she said, and etc., you're going to find yourself falling in gossip, falling in creating drama, contributing in dramas, contributing in basically talk that is not contributing to your Jannah, but more likely probably putting you in slippery slopes for hellfire. وَكَثْرَةَ السُّؤَالِ. Asking too many questions. What are we talking about? Are we here talking about ilm? No. كَثْرَةَ السُّؤَالِ is basically involving you're asking people about matters that don't relate to you. But wait a minute, didn't the Prophet ﷺ ask, for example, Jabir ibn Abdullah, did you get married, and etc.? There's a difference between showing compassion and asking about the person and showing them that you care, and between asking for basically getting more information just for the sake of getting information and basically trying to expose the person. So the intention behind the questions is key to knowing whether this is permissible or not permissible. إضاعة المال. What is إضاعة المال? Wandering money. Well, what makes the area and the parameter that this is wandering money and this is not wandering money? You're looking at three things. You're looking at ضرورات, you're looking at الحاجات, you're looking at تحسينات. You're looking at, is this something that is a need? Is this something that is a want? Is this something that you can live without? Is this something that you can probably use that type of money instead of to getting more of that? So that's why if you really want to look at perhaps our homes, look at the pantry. How much of items does the pantry have? If you're having a lot of these candies, a lot of these, I don't know, just different items, then if your pantry is full of all of these things, then you're taking too much of dunya. Learn how to give up on some of those things that you probably have in your closet, that you probably have in your pantry, that you probably have in your house, and learn how to give up on your dunya and not wander it and stick to what is necessary or what is probably needed. What's the difference between necessary and needed? Necessary, it's impossible for you to live without. That's necessary. What is needed? Life would be a struggle without this. Okay, so that's the difference between needed and necessary. Okay, so there's a lot more details. Let's see. Most of the scholars, it basically said كثرة السؤال basically means to ask different questions, even if it's in relationship to fiqh. And the word they used is تنطعا وتكلفا. What's the difference at التنطع and التكلف? So التكلف is when a person is asking questions, not for the sake of learning, but it's really for the sake of boasting. And التنطع is just asking questions, putting out and laying out all these hypothetical questions really that are irrelevant, but it's just wanting to just ask questions to really stalk and just waste time. And sometimes not for the sake of learning, but it's just for, like we said, really useless questions that are irrelevant to probably our life. And that's why he said تشقيق المولدات. What is it, المولدات? Like asking questions, and then it's a sub-question, it's a third sub-question, even though it's irrelevant to somebody's life or probably irrelevant at all. But these people basically would get into such questions really not because they care about the answer as much as it's just wanting to somehow do the gotcha type of thing. So, and of course, the Salaf كانوا يكرهون ذلك. What does that mean? So, Salaf would basically be the Sahaba, would basically be the ulama, those would be the Salaf, and they used to hate such types of questions because if we basically are putting out and laying out all these hypothetical questions, that what that is going to lead to, we're just laying out probably and putting all the effort in hypothetical questions that probably didn't even happen. And with hypothetical questions, you're going to end up putting out hypothetical answers, and that's really a waste of time. It's a waste of time, and certainly you're just getting and engaging into unnecessary, I guess, energy and in investing a lot of work in what is not beneficial. Let's see. Imam Malik had said, I had أدركت أهل هذا البلد. What does that mean? Like what I had always learned about the people in this city. What city? Well, this is Medina. He said they only had one ilm, which basically is al-Kitab and the Sunnah, al-Quran and the Sunnah. And if any matter were to happen, basically the deputy, the person that is in the head of basically the government, he would combine the scholars. So it's not just people just discussing any matter, but he would basically combine all the scholars. And then, of course, if they were to agree on a certain ruling, he would apply that. And he said, but a lot of you are just asking too many questions. And the Prophet ﷺ had hated asking too many questions that are irrelevant. So let's see, Ibn Abd al-Barri basically في جامع البيان العلم. That's a very important book. I wish I can teach that book. It's such an important book. Okay, maybe one day. And he said المراد بكثرة المسائل كثرة سؤال الناس الأموال والحوائج إلحاحا واستكثارا. And it was also mentioned that what it means to ask too many questions is basically asking people for money or services, probably, and being too insisting. You're insisting and basically just to get more. And, it's so disgusting, to be honest. There are certain people that are just too insisting. So even when you're doing a phone call, you did a phone call, don't make it 3, 4, 5 phone calls. If the person didn't answer, trust me, they know that you had made a missed call. They could see it. Unless if it's an emergency, that's a different story. But to do this ilhah and insisting on something, even though you know that the other person might have seen it, is really degrading your honor and degrading them as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لا تسألوا عن أشياء تبد لكم تسؤكم. We're not just talking about calling only or even requesting things, but we're talking about different ways of showing your interest in something, and being too insisting on it. Give space. If somebody does not want to answer, someone would heard your request, but they did not want to comply, give that space to preserve your honor. And that's why Imam Malik had said what is intended by, of course, the consistent questions is basically asking about things that don't matter, or probably in relationship to people's lives, and therefore probably exposing what they didn't want to expose about themselves, and asking about matters that relate to them. It's considered private. How and what happened between her and her husband is not of your business. What happened and how much rent they pay, the questions that relate to people's religion. Perhaps things like, did you ever commit this sin? Did you ever commit major sins, minor sins? What kind of sins did you commit, etc.? This is not of your business whatsoever to ask. 2, people's lives in relationship to personal matters and people's lives, perhaps that relate to, number 1, mental health. Only a therapist would probably want to ask about that, but things that relate to people's matters probably within their homes, and certainly the more we're speaking about, if we're speaking about the structure, the bedroom is the most private area. That's to be between the husband and the wife only. And then if we go outside a little bit, then we're speaking about perhaps the house. Teach your children that what happens around the house, whether it's, hey, mom and dad got into a dispute, hey, dad probably said an inappropriate word, etc., or mom's probably got angry and said this word. This is supposed to be completely private, because to expose what happens within your homes or even your children, and exposing what sins your children had committed, even if it's to your sisters, your family, etc., that's supposed to be considered within within the area that is supposed to be private. And certainly we're talking about DNAIM. Remember the deen, the nafs, the aql, the ird, al-ird, al-a'rad, but the relationship between a husband and a wife, the relationship between a husband and wife, whether we're speaking about the personal matters, very personal, those things are never to be exposed. So unless only perhaps because you probably need a treatment, maybe you're getting, I guess, this frequent bleeding, you needed to get to probably see an OB to make sure that, hey, how can I solve this problem? Or maybe erectile dysfunction, etc. Then we need an expert to basically help us understand this, and not necessarily sharing it with your family, sharing it with your friends, etc. This is supposed to be extremely private. And certainly when we're speaking about money as well, so DNAIM, the final one is mal, exposing things about, well, how much money you're making, how much money you're spending, how much money your husband is making, and certainly your expenses, how much money you're basically buying in food or electricity or paying, and all of that. That's supposed to be completely private. Why is it supposed to be completely private? Why can't I share it? Because the more you share of your private information, the more exposed you become. Of course, the more exposed and transparent you become, the more, of course, you become a possible victim of probably people intruding into your business. Your business becomes from private business to public property. So if you were to share, for example, your social security number, why are you not supposed to share that? Because the second that you would share this information, you would be exposing and we would become more vulnerable to probably people, scamming you, people using your information, people probably getting into your area, and perhaps you become a victim of probably different things happening to you. So we're not just talking about social security number, but we're also talking about, hey, you sharing more information about your private life, about yourself, your sins, whatever it is, you become more vulnerable to perhaps such information be getting used against you. So just like you don't want other people to misuse your information and you becoming more vulnerable, well, that's the same thing. You want to make sure that you don't also ask about other people's private information, because they too want their spaces to be respected as well. So that comes in with وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا, and do not spy on others, and do not basically speak ill of people behind their backs. And that's why, let's see, Ibn Khuwayza Mandad. Who's Ibn Khuwayza Mandad? Ibn Khuwayza Mandad was one of the Maliki scholars, but not in Morocco, in Iraq. Let's see. He said, قال أصحابنا. He said, our friends. Who's their friends? I mean, his friends? No, this is talking about the Maliki scholars. He said, متى قدم إليه طعام لم يسأل عنه. If you are presented with food, for example, somebody, hey, you're going to somebody's house and you're basically probably given some food, you wouldn't ask, well, where did you get this from? How much was it? And was there like a promotion on it? Was there a sale or whatever it is? Or how much was it costing, etc.? Just appreciate, they presented, I don't know, grapes to you or a cake to you. Just eat it without asking too many questions. Why not ask too many questions? Because if you had known probably certain information that I probably got this from a very expensive restaurant, it would be, hey, I'm exposing some of my financial information. And if I basically told you that I got it from probably a place that's usually perceived as very cheap, well, then I'm embarrassing myself that I cannot afford to get you something else. I can't afford to get you something that is probably extravagant. So the best thing to do is just respect the privacy, respect what is presented to you, learn the adab, and certainly just take the matters that a Muslim is supposed to be sahih. A person is supposed to be good. They're presenting whatever they're presenting. Barakallahu fihim. Thank you so much for whatever services you're giving me. They provided chicken. They provided, I don't know, a salami sandwich, whatever it is. Jazakumullah khairan. And certainly right there.
Assalamu alaikum.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I mean, I understand that this is coming from like a man's point of view.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, but you know, because sisters, they might say, yeah, I got a good deal on something, but I mean, you know what I mean?
So, Noura, it depends on culture, really. It depends on
okay.
culture, and of course, certainly, and even the closeness of the relationship from one person to another. You know, like for example, X and Y, you guys are really close, you're really best friends. You know, you might buy something from Aldi, and you know, it's just like, hey, you got a really good deal. But someone else, you know, you would say, I went to Aldi, she might look down at you, etc. But you know.
Okay,
You know what I mean? There's a huge difference between.
So it depends on like the closeness of the person and the culture, because
Absolutely.
I know, like my husband, he said that you know, they used to say if the wife is well fed, it means the husband is taking care of her or something, right?
Well, I mean, you know, culture plays, you know, a huge factor in this, and at the same time, really the person's intention. Some people, they are asking really to learn. It's like, oh, I like the meat. It's really fresh. Where did you get it from? And because, hey, I'm looking for fresh meat. I'm really new to the place. I'm looking for this. Not
or sarcasm. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
There's a difference, Noura. When I like the point that you were like, well, you know, this is probably a man's point of view, that they're looking at it like money, and so I'm trying to classify you as a financial status. But is that necessarily the case? So it really depends on the context. It really depends on what we're looking at and who and why and the motive behind all of this. That's going to answer a lot. So we're not saying that every time somebody asks this question, you just committed a sin. You got to do a lot of stuff today.
Alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair.
Right. So you really want to look at the context. It's just learning sometimes to keep in consideration the adab, and the motivation behind a lot of these questions is really going to help a lot in, I guess, knowing the spaces that is given to us and the spaces that is probably not given to us. Maybe I'm so close to Noura that, hey, I'll literally say, I got this from the thrift store the other day, and look, it's a good deal. Somebody else, I might tell them that I got this from a thrift store, and they might look down at me like, really? How could you? This is so disgusting. You know what I'm saying? And that's
so you have to kind of use your judgment.
You got to use your judgment, and you also have to recognize how close is this person to me. There's a huge difference. Is this my sister? Is this my close friend? Is this somebody that I guess we're to a certain limit where I guess we're on the same area? There's a difference. Where did I get this from? So I got this from Surah An-Nur. So in Surah An-Nur, we're going to get to there, inshallah. It basically tells us that there's a limit, like, okay, there's a certain aura, there's a certain time, there are certain spaces that you should not be basically entering. But then when it talked about friends, that if your friend gives you a key, if your friend allows you within that, basically that space or that premise, then you're allowed to come in. You're allowed to come in. Hey, they're allowing you in their homes. It's okay. We're not just talking about a premise. We're not just talking about spaces, but we're also talking about social spaces. We're also talking about spaces that, hey, you know that we're close friends, and me asking you questions in regards.
Wow, that's going to be very interesting.
It's going to be really interesting. Absolutely. Like, how close is our friendship? At the same time, my special advice, even if you are really close with a certain friend, there are certain spaces no one is allowed in those spaces except you and your husband. There are certain spaces, even your parents should not be in there. And no one else. It's just you and your husband. So you have to do your wise judgment in seeing, should I allow someone else? Should I not allow someone else? How much information to share about, about your personal life, or about, those matters, even if we're speaking about DNAIM, as much as you can limit the information that you share about yourself, even if it's to a close friend, and let your tongue engage in more dhikr than engaging in qeel and qal. So
there's a question in the chat.
Can we adjust our job title to prevent others from searching our salary? Okay. So if you want to adjust your job title, that's okay. But just make sure that when, let's say, you're hired for a certain job, that you are honest with what you're competent in doing. Okay? So, because that's an amana. So there's a difference between what I share about myself to the public and what I share about myself to probably when I'm given a certain responsibility or a certain task. There's a difference. Because if I'm given a certain task, I have to basically be qualified to do that task, and I have to really be honest in what I'm capable of doing. Okay, but if I'm generally, people are asking me, well, so what do you do? For example, a manager. And you're like, a manager? Yeah, well, I'm a manager at home. Okay, I'm a manager.
Yeah, that could go both ways,
It could go both ways. I'm a manager at home.
Some people might, let's say that I was a doctor, right? And I don't want to tell everybody because everybody thinks that, I'm rich. And I'm not a doctor and I'm not rich, but I'm just saying.
Are you sure, Noura? So,
yes, I'm sure.
Okay.
No, I think, Assalamu alaikum, like some people, if you tell them you work for the county, they think you make a certain money. If you say you work for the state or the county, but they don't know what you're doing in the county or the state.
So in the end, if you didn't want to say what you do, you said, I work as a clerk. Okay. Because you probably didn't want to expose the amount of money that you were making, or probably you didn't want people coming at you, wanting you to probably do certain services that you're not allowed to do within the county, and you didn't want to put yourself in these positions where you don't know how to say sorry, but that's illegal for me to do. But then people are coming at you and you don't want to continuously say no. So you just say, I'm a clerk or an office, an assistant, I guess an assistant or an office or a secretary or etc. Okay. So you can use what is called tawriya. What is tawriya? Tawriya is letting the other person really understand one thing, but the word itself is containing some ambiguity that the other person is understanding one thing, but your words are holding a certain amount of truth. Okay. So you can use tawriya. That's permissible. All right. I hope I answered that one. So inshallah, it is right now 2:04, but inshallah, we will continue. Tomorrow we've got remember, we are at 54th hadith. So we've got some hadith to do. So stay tuned tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow. Oh, are we? Oh, yeah, because we missed some days, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm excited about it. I just don't know how to, only if I'm really sick, Noura, will I know how to not, give the dars. But if I'm not sick, alhamdulillah, I'll be able to do it. So stay tuned tomorrow.
Even though we're on break for the semester, but you missed days, so what should we do?
Yeah. Well, exactly. We have no choice but to attend those makeup days.